Hello and welcome to the Business of Winning podcast, brought to you by Performance Insights, providing expert speakers and hosts from the world of Formula One motor racing to corporate events and conferences worldwide. Just click on www.performanceinsights.co.uk and send us your requirements.
Hello, and you're very welcome to the latest episode of the Business of Winning podcast with me, Mark Gallagher. And I'm delighted to say that we are being joined today by Jennie Gow, the voice of Formula One on BBC 5 Live for the last 15 years as a pit lane reporter, a commentator, an absolute expert on the sport, very passionate indeed she is about all things Formula One. And of course, an interviewer of the great and good in Formula One, which is something I'll be talking to her about during the podcast. She's been through a period of adversity, it's fair to say. We'll talk a little bit more about that during the podcast, but sit back and enjoy Jennie Gow and her insights on her life in Formula One and her thoughts of the season ahead. So Jennie, great to have you with us on the podcast. And you know, as you and I are recording this, Formula One testing is underway in Bahrain. In fact, day 2 has just started. It's very exciting, isn't it? I mean, what are your thoughts on it's finally all getting underway for 2025?
And this, Mark, is a season that I feel we've waited for with bated breath. Last year, it was all about, Max is going to dominate. Red Bull are going to be there. Yes, of course, we've got Lewis, but he's not moving for another year. But now it's actually happening. So we aren't in a Red Bull dominant era anymore, it seems. So the possibilities for who can succeed out there on track this year seem almost endless. Ferrari, Hamilton finally joined together in that union. I think, like everybody, cannot wait for Australia, cannot wait for the season to get started.
Now, we're going to talk about Melbourne in a few moments, but already you are communicating your enthusiasm for the season ahead. I've listened to quite a few previews of the season already, and everyone seems to be saying quite similar things. They've never quite known anything like it in terms of the unpredictability of the season ahead. And unpredictability has been something that we've desperately needed in Formula One for a while, isn't it?
Absolutely. Going into last year, I remember speaking about the season, no changes. Absolutely not a single driver change going into the beginning of last year's season. This year, 10 driver movements, 10 driver changes. And we've got rookies aplenty, 5 of them. So it just feels like we've had this rebirth of F1. And as you say, we're excited. No one quite can pin exactly what's going to happen. And that's the beauty of sport. Yeah. That's when you know it's in a good place, when you don't know what's going to happen.
So here we are coming into this amazing season. And to kick it all off, we had that astonishing launch of Formula One at the O2 Arena. I know you were there. I follow you on Instagram and whatever. So I know you were sitting up there watching all that was unfolding. Honestly, what did you make of it all, Jennie?
So we had been there the whole day. I'm not going to lie. So it was a big media junket. So we'd been there. Rick Edwards, who's the presenter of 5 Live Breakfast, so important was the event. He came down after the breakfast show and joined us to present the proceedings for 5 Live and the BBC. We'd spoken to people, we'd sat down with drivers and team principals, and by the time we approached the red carpet, not being on it, obviously, not posh enough for that, but beside it, speaking to drivers and team principals again, we were a bit cynical. We thought, is this going to work? I don't know. We hadn't seen any fans at that point. We didn't realise when we put down our microphones and actually went into the O2, we had no idea what was about to happen. I sat on my seat at 8 o'clock when the show started, looked around me and saw the O2 absolutely full of fans and spectators and people who wanted to be part of F1. And honestly, I can still feel the chills running up and down me. It was incredible. And all of that cynicism that F1 journalists are so prone to, it just disappeared in the blink of an eye. And I was fully on board for the whole event. It was fabulous.
Now, I can tell you that my little team at Performance Insights, we had a Zoom call not long before the launch of the O2. And my prediction was that it was all going to overrun massively and it was all going to take too long. And then I sat there and watched a pretty well spot on 2-hour presentation. And I mean, I was kind of cheering at the end of it because I know just how difficult it is to put on a car launch for one team, let alone 10 teams. And then Jack Whitehall, who we all kind of scratched our heads and wondered how that would go. Everything really did seem to work remarkably well for something that was truly innovative for Formula One.
And I'm glad that you were such a Take That fan that you were cheering at the end. Who knew, Mark? No, I also had my reservations about how this was going to work. And speaking to the teams, they were saying, oh, we've only got 7 minutes. I was like, how is this going to work when I know Zach Brown alone can speak for 7 minutes if you ask him one question, let alone how's your season preparations going? So I feared, as you did, that it wouldn't quite work. But for a first-time event, and you have to say this is the first of its kind, it was so slick. The presentation was great. I thought all of the F1 talent alongside Jack Whitehall, who was, as you say, not the go-to pick, but he played it absolutely perfectly. And there were lots of in-jokes, but I think everyone could get them. I just thought it was a really successful event, timing-wise, branding-wise, the way that the cars got off and on stage, and the whole thing was just something magical.
Can I ask you, you know that buggy that that platform the cars were on that came onto the stage, were you like me waiting for one of them to break down?
You can tell we come from very different paths into ourselves. No, I wasn't. I thought it was probably only a matter of time until something went wrong with a car, because that's obviously the moving part of it. But no, nothing went wrong until, of course, the bit that everyone is talking about and everyone is asking me about in the street when I speak to people, the booing.
The booing.
Boogate. The booing. The booing as Christian Horner got onto the stage as he introduced the Red Bull video. And I couldn't quite believe what I was hearing. I mean, you can't pick it up so well on the TV, but it thundered round the O2. It was quite unmistakable.
So can I ask you a very direct question about that? So what do you put the booing of Christian and Max down to? Is it two separate things? Is it the Max Lewis Abu Dhabi saga, 4 years later, a lot of people still haven't got over that? Is it the allegations that were made against Christian Horner and the way in which Red Bull dealt with that? What do you put the booing down to?
I think it's a number of different incidents that have led to this point, dominating the sport for so long, with two different drivers, not just Max, but with Sebastian Vettel also. I think Red Bull found themselves in a position where they were taking over the sport. And either you loved that because you're a Red Bull fan, or you hated it because you were someone else. So there's that counting against them. Obviously, the allegations, the way it was handled, Adrian Newey then leaving the team, all of that comes into one bracket. You've got the cheating, which they were accused of and found guilty of, leading up to 21 and 22, and the whole going over the cost cap regulations. People don't like that, and they remember that. And then, of course, you've got Abu Dhabi. So all of that adds into that melting pot. But I feel like they've also not handled their PR as well as they potentially could. And Christian Horner standing up on stage, what did he think was going to happen? And I just question that decision of him introducing the team. Just let the video go, let it roll. Hear from Max, hear from the drivers. They didn't let the drivers speak for whatever reason. And the fans, again, I don't think they were booing Max. They were booing his decision not to speak to them.
Yeah. I felt very sorry for Liam Lawson. I would have loved Liam Lawson to have been able to say a few words on, the launch of his official career at Red Bull Racing. And it's really interesting. Red Bull, a company so famed for its ability to build its brand and build a phenomenal profile for its business globally. But at the moment, there's definitely a miscuing on the communication side. Let's just change tack. So talking about communication, you've gone and written a book, How to Read F1. I mean, Mike, I have to say, I really enjoyed going through it. We're going to talk in a moment about the format of the book. What led you to decide to write this book, How to Read F1? I know a little bit about the background to this, but what led to your decision to write it, and how did you find that process?
I think I must have just had one of those days where I was like, yeah, let's do it. Because I got a phone call from a very nice guy at the BBC and a follow-up email saying, I think you should write a book. And I said, I had a stroke 6 months ago. Not quite as fluently and eloquently as that, but yes. And I couldn't imagine myself at the best of times writing a book, let alone whilst recovering from a stroke that took away my ability to communicate, write, read, speak. And I said no, couldn't possibly think of doing it. And Richard at the BBC said, you know what, just have a call with Nell at the publishers at Penguin and see what you feel after you've spoken to her. And Nell is a masterful person because she said, let's write a book. And I said, yes, absolutely. So I went away from this meeting and wrote a couple of chapters. Now, this is, for someone who doesn't know, this is an A to Z guide. So for someone learning how to write again, it's quite handy because I could go through my A's and my B's and it didn't have to flow like a proper plot. So it was just pieces of information, which made it far easier for me. And I went away and wrote my I and A subject matters and sent them away to Nell at Penguin and thought, she is never going to say yes to this. It was the first time I'd even opened my laptop after my stroke. And it took me ages to get the letters together. And I mean, spell check was my new best friend. But she sent a message back and said, yeah, let's do it. I'll send you a contract. And I still don't quite believe it. But I went away and I had a very fixed target, which worked for me, of 600 words every day.
Amazing.
So I got up, did physio, did all my stuff that you have to do, and then sat down with a cup of tea, some candles in the background, opened up my laptop with a clear desk and just hammered away like a little beaver building a dam. And I was determined to get those 600 words every day. And sometimes it was easy. And sometimes my brain would just work. And other times my brain would fight me so badly and say, I don't want to spell the word and. You can have the word but instead. But we got there. So, I mean, when I talk about it, Mark, I'm always a little worried that I'm saying it's a terrible book. But actually, I'm really proud of it. And I actually think it's quite good.
Oh, it's honestly, I didn't know what to expect. When you very kindly sent me a PDF of the book, and it is, by the way, now available in Australia. I did check.
Yay.
Actually.
Yes.
In fact, the hardback version was published in Australia just 2 weeks ago. So we're kind of catching up with you in the UK. So I thought it would be, like a chapter on technology and a chapter on drivers and, chapter on strategy. And I was and I'll be honest, I've read lots of books by people in Formula One over the years, and some of them are very, very hard to get through. then your book turns up, and it is, as you say, literally an A to Z. And I have to tell you, I was picking it up and putting it down. I mean, quite literally, I was going in, reading a section, leaving it. Then 2 days later, I'd go back and I'd read another one and finding it really very entertaining. Can I tell you my favorite chapter?
Yes, you can. I'm thrilled and delighted to know.
Letter S.
Oh gosh.
Okay. I'm going to remind you what you wrote. So S is for Carlos Sainz, Logan Sargent, Sauber, Michael Schumacher, Sectors, Ayrton Senna, Silverstone, Sims, Gunther Steiner, Stewards, Jackie Stewart, Strategy, and Lance Stroll. And honestly, I went into that chapter and I really enjoyed, jumping around from Carlos Sainz to, good old Michael Schumacher, who we all miss terribly, and wish him and his family well. And then Ayrton Senna, and then, of course, reading about my good friend Gunther Steiner, who we work with. And I'm just thinking, you must have had so much fun writing this, because it actually comes across. And for any reader, whether you are new to Formula One or whether you're an old diehard like me who's, been around the block and followed it for years, it's a reminder of just so many wonderful people and things about our sport that we love and enjoy. So the format really did work, didn't it, Jenny?
I had great fun with the formats, and just thinking, S. Oh gosh, there's a lot, and so many for S. And there are some letters that just lead themselves to an A to Z guide, and others which were remarkably hard to find letters and subject headings for, Q being one of them. But S and M and R were mammoths. They were behemoth.
Yeah.
I used to dread opening up my laptop and still being on S, because S took a long time, and it's quite late in the alphabet. So I was like, oh no, not S again. But just going through those memories of, my time with Michael Schumacher and his amazing, outstanding feats in F1, and then later on in life, and going back and thinking of, as you say, Gunther Steiner or Sir Jackie Stewart. I mean, what a privilege to have been able to write, meet, speak with these people, and then share that with readers.
Yeah. And then you have, as you say, you got the embarrassment of riches under S. And then I laughed out loud when I opened V and discovered Vettel and Verstappen. And that's it. There's nothing else to be said under letter V. It's just Vettel and Verstappen. I mean, I don't want to embarrass you when asking you this, but did you have some people who you just thought, I'm going to exclude them?
I didn't go out there and meaningfully exclude people, but I knew I could not fit everyone into this book that I would have liked to.
Sure.
There were some people that made the book that I probably would have not chosen to put in the book. Just because I didn't feel like their contribution to F1 was as great. For example, no offense, but Logan Sargent.
Yeah.
He's in the book because at the time of writing, he was a current driver.
Yeah.
Now, I knew he probably wouldn't be around for too long, but you couldn't exclude him because at the time of writing, he was an F1 driver. Yeah. So that was really hard. And unfortunately, then you have to lose another driver. And say, for example, I'm just trying to rack my brain. I don't think... Well, there are a few drivers that I would have loved to put in there that I didn't.
Yeah.
And I still feel a bit tied, like Nigel Mansell. I've gone because I needed to with, a certain driver, and at the expense of Nige.
Now, Jennie Gow, in your book, How to Read F1, I loved the did you know sidebars. Did you know? Now, here's the thing. When I read something that I did not know, I loved it. So I've picked two.
Okay.
One was, did you know Fernando Alonso is affected by Poland syndrome, which means he is missing his right pectoral muscle? How on earth did you find that out?
Well, these are the amazing things that you find out along the way. And actually, if you now go back and look at any picture of Fernando Alonso in team kit, you will be able to tell his affected side. Just from looking at that, now you have the knowledge. But if you didn't have the knowledge, you wouldn't be able to do that. I know you're trying to look up Fernando Alonso pictures on your laptop.
I am now going to be literally inches from my television screen watching Fernando Alonso, trying to figure out, or actually, when I meet you in Melbourne, I might run up to him and have a quick look at what it is about him. I tell you the other one that I loved, because I'm actually, we've worked with Valtteri at Performance Insights, and he's joining me here in Adelaide at the Adelaide Motorsport Festival, which is a weekend before the Melbourne Grand Prix. So, and I love this one. It's Lance Corporal Bottas. He spent a brief time serving in the Finnish army before finding his place in F1. I mean, it's just lovely little tidbits, which when you open a book and you think, I'm going to know everything in here, and then you start reading things like that and you're learning, just a lot of fun.
Oh, thank you. And do you know what? That bit was my own bit. I came up with that because, and the first Did You Know was about Australia. And it made the cut, it made the book, because the first thing I wrote was A for Australia. And no Australian driver has ever won the F1 Australian Grand Prix.
Correct.
And that was the first Did You Know? And then then I had to find more. And I found that bit pulled me through when I couldn't find what I wanted to say. So, yeah.
And can I tell you that your stat about Adelaide actually made a speech that I was giving last week. So I was giving a speech at a conference in Adelaide last week to 300 people from the construction industry, and I was able to remind them all that the Adelaide Grand Prix had the largest ever audience.
Yes.
And I said, I told them, it's in Jennie Gow's book, How to Read F1. So just loved how you pulled all of that together. The book's a great read, and I really would recommend it to anyone listening. And it doesn't matter if you're a hard-bitten F1 fan or if you're new to it, go out and buy it. It's terrific. It's terrific fun. Jennie, I think I'm right in saying this is your 15th year in Formula One.
Yeah, terrifying, isn't it?
Yeah, tell me about it. I wish I was only on my 15th year. But anyway, 15th year in Formula One. So this is really, I suppose, for any listeners who want to know, how on earth did you crack it? How did you get into Formula One? What was Jennie Gow's career path?
So it was an interesting one because I qualified as a journalist way back when and wanted to do sport, fascinated by sport. But he couldn't really get into anything else other than football at that time, because football was massive. So there were more opportunities, even for a female coming into a male-dominated sport. There were opportunities. So the first ever job that I had working in sport was actually for Match of the Day magazine. And I don't even know if it's still going. But that was just 1 week of work experience. And it kind of sums up my career in short, which was that I went to a Chelsea press conference. And someone in the audience there or working said, "Oh, who do you work for?" And I very cockily, bearing in mind I was on my 1 week work experience, said, "Oh, yes, I'm here for BBC Sport." And wouldn't you know, that one guy in the room that I happened to chat to also worked for BBC Sport. So he found me out straight away. I was so mortified. So I kind of, oh yes, but I'm on work experience, and promptly backed out. But he found me on the phone. And he phoned me at my last day of Match of the Day magazine and said, "I really liked your style. If you ever need any more work experience, come and find me and we'll sort something out." And the doors from that point onwards opened. And I used that cocky bravado. I was the yes girl. I said yes. Whenever anyone wanted something done in the office, I was there. I'd stay late. I'd come in early. I worked my butt off. And I eventually left BBC Sport. And it was a really hard decision, but I thought, you know what? I'm never going to exceed and fulfill my ambition if I don't get out. So I left and went to commercial, and we teamed up with a speedway team in Bridgewater. And that one of those nights when I was saying, "Hi, this is Jenny and John from the Orchard FM Breakfast Show, here to welcome you to Bridgewater Speedway. A producer from Sky came up and said, "Hey, do you fancy doing some long track with us?" I was like, "Of course, I'm the yes girl." And that led into motorsport. And I've never looked back.
Amazing. I cannot believe that your first Formula One race for BBC 5 Live was that Canadian Grand Prix. I mean, I was running Cosworth at the time, and I remember spending 4 hours pacing up and down behind the garages, totally soaked to the skin in the pouring rain, and then watching that never to be forgotten victory by dear Jensen and the reaction of his dad. When he crossed. And here were you you must have thought, this is a completely mad world.
Of course. And funnily enough, to show you, look what I have on my desk.
Oh, wonderful.
It is that car,
it's that car
that won the Canadian Grand Prix, driven by Jenson Button. It's not life size, it's just miniature. But that was some Grand Prix, wasn't it? Yeah. What a bonkers first race.
How did you end up getting to go to that? Because it's not every day that you get flown across the Atlantic to go to a Grand Prix for your first time, broadcasting. I mean, so how did that particular event happen for you? Was that just part of your contract for that season, or did it come out of the blue at the 11th hour, or how did that come about?
So I spent 1 year covering MotoGP for the BBC in 2010. And 2011, I got called in by BBC Radio and said, "Look, we might have some races for you. Would you be up for it? Would you fancy doing some F1?" And I was like, "Yeah, that'd be great." Didn't think much of it. And then got the phone call saying that Natalie Pinkham, who was the new 5 Live F1 pit lane reporter, was taking some leave. And she was choosing a couple of races to miss through that season. And my ears pricked up and I was like, "Yeah, you want me? Okay, I can do that." So I substituted for Natalie for the Canadian and Hungarian Grand Prix. 2 absolute great races.
Great races.
Both won by Jenson Button. So then, of course, he was like, "You have to come to every single race," which was a great introduction to the Button family. But that race changed my life, probably, changed everything. Because all of a sudden, I was in F1. And okay, I was just there covering for Natalie, but then she got the call just before the Hungarian Grand Prix to join David Croft, Martin Brundle, and all of Ted, all of those people who were moving across to Sky, leaving this massive vacancy, a Jenny-shaped vacancy in F1, doing what I love, which is BBC Radio. I mean, it couldn't have worked out better. So
beautiful.
Natalie went to a job she loves, and I came to a job that I love and have made my own. And it was so exciting. So yes, I did the whole season in 12 and have done every season since 2012.
It's always great to hear how people become infected by Formula One, because there is no vaccine against it. Once it's in the system, it's difficult to give up. You've had so many highlights. I mean, you actually, in the introduction to your book, you talk about some of the great moments that you've experienced. What was something that I wanted to specifically ask you about are those moments where you have a one-to-one interview. You mentioned Michael Schumacher earlier on when we were talking about the letter S in your book, and you mentioned that although you didn't get to see him when he was in his pomp at Ferrari, you met him and interviewed him when he was in the latter stage of his career at Mercedes. But then you've been able to interview Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. How are they to interview? How do you find them? You mentioned in the book, everyone has good days and bad days, but do you dread those, or do you relish the opportunity to do a one-to-one with them?
I absolutely relish it. And I would struggle to find or to understand anyone who wouldn't enjoy that time and find it fascinating, because you're talking to someone who is the best in what they do. and speaking to anyone, getting insight from anyone who you view as the best at what they do is such a privilege and such an insightful experience. And you can learn so much from actually sitting down and listening to these wonderful people. And it doesn't just have to be a driver. It can be anyone from the team. They all have remarkable experiences to share. And they all play a part in the likes of Lewis, Max, Michael, Sebastian winning so many times. And you yourself being in a team, running a team, seeing how it all works, how it comes together. There is something absolutely beautiful about that moment. Someone letting you into that world to the point of, sitting down. The first time I sat down with Lewis and he held the door open for us, for me and my producer. And I was like, I didn't expect that. And he was so just enthusiastic to share his experiences with the listener and with me and my producer. And I find every sit down thrilling, no matter who it's with.
Lewis is a very interesting guy, isn't he? There's a kind of a public persona of him, and we know, of course, he has a huge fan base. But when you get to meet him on a one-to-one basis, and you've met him much more than I have, but I had the privilege of doing an event with him, just the two of us, a few years ago in Singapore. And I was completely blown away by the personality, frankly, the humility, and how articulate he. I mean, it seems like such an obvious thing to say. Of course, he's articulate. Why wouldn't he be? He's at the top of his game. But he is such an impressive person to talk to, isn't he?
Absolutely. And I think you do meet a lot of people who underestimate him, who don't like him, who just think he's rude, who think he's arrogant, selfish. And these aren't words that I connect with him. And there are days when he is incredibly short. He does not want to speak to the media. He doesn't particularly like media days. But then you speak to every driver. They don't like media days. What they like is getting in a car and driving really fast, and not being asked the same question time and time again for a whole of Thursdays.
Yeah.
But actually, when you connect and spend time in a one-to-one situation, you get more. You get to actually see what they are like rather than the persona that they put on sometimes.
Yeah. And by the way, listeners, that shortness that Jennie talked about is something that Nigel Mansell didn't enjoy doing media days. Nelson Piquet hated them. Ayrton Senna didn't enjoy doing media. They all just want to concentrate on the thing they want to do, which is drive the car fast, talk to the engineers, find a way to make the car go even faster, beat their teammate, all that kind of good stuff. Jennie, it's true to say that you're an inspiration to women and to young women and girls who potentially want to work in Formula One. You've been an ambassador for FIA Girls on Track. Give me your thoughts on where our industry is today on the journey in terms of gender diversity, inclusion. It's a big topic, of course, in politics at the moment. There's a big pushback on DEI from certain quarters that we won't mention on our podcast. But you've been very much at the epicenter of seeing so much of that. And of course, in 2025, we're having our first season with a female race engineer on the pit wall as an example of the change. Are we in a good place? Is it moving in the right direction? And is it moving quickly enough in the right direction?
We are in such a better place than we were. When I joined 15 years ago, it was unthinkable to think of a mechanic or a race engineer on the pit wall. It didn't happen. And we're in a place now where you have all these amazing women leading the way. So Hannah Smits at Red Bull. You've got Ruth Buscombe, who was obviously in the pit lane, and now she's representing the pit lane in media. All of these amazing engineers, Bernie Collins, who have shown that if you want to do STEM and you want to be an engineer, a mechanic, there is a way in. You've got W Series that evolved into F1 Academy that is forcing the matter. It's not enough for the F1 teams to go, oh, isn't that nice, W Series? No, they have to buy into having a team member who is female. And they are not just another driver, they are part of the team. And I think that and Susie Wolff and her amazing technique and the way she's been able to run the F1 Academy and make it a subject for everyone to be involved in is truly inspirational. I'm just there trying to do my bit to bring more people, more fans, more enthusiasts into F1. But they're the real game changers, and they are doing things every day to make a difference. And it's not about banging the drum. F1 is changing quickly. The grandstand are changing. The pit lane is changing and evolving. And from, diversity and inclusion, it's massive. And it's right. It is. And it secures the future of F1.
Yeah.
Before, you remember, Mark, we were in a place where F1's boring. What's the future?
Yeah.
Where do we go with this fossilized, burning of the planet for our fun and pleasure? But now it's got a purpose, a mission, and it's dynamic, and there are young people coming to racetracks learning about it. And it's not a right or wrong. It's just joyful to see more people coming to and being involved in F1.
Do you see a day when Jennie Gow walks up to the media pen in the paddock, interviews a female Formula One race driver?
Gosh, I'd love that.
Wouldn't you?
I think it's still a long way coming.
Okay.
But, change is happening, and it will happen. It might not happen in my time, but it will happen.
Let's hope it does happen in your time.
Oh my goodness, wouldn't that be me? I'm not happy with just seeing a winner either. I want to see an F1 female champion, because being in F1 alone isn't good enough. We need to keep on pushing, and to be in F1 as a female, you'll have had to have worked a million times harder than the man standing next to you. So by rights, you should be able to be the best. It's going to take a while, but I'm there cheering all the way.
Now, let's talk about something that you mentioned earlier on in the podcast, which was the very serious stroke that you had. And I'm asking you about this because it's an important part of your story. And here I am interviewing you on our Business of Winning podcast. And I'm just thinking to myself, you are amazing, because I know from my eldest sister, she had a very serious stroke. I remember her telling me it was like watching a computer reboot as her vocabulary came back and word after word regained her memory and was able to put sentences together. And I remember her stroke specialist saying to her she was a kind of case study in good treatment, because they managed to catch the clot and pull it out. And she has made a very, very, very good recovery. But you are a communicator, and it must have been utterly devastating to have the one thing that you rely on, your voice and your ability to communicate, afflicted by this stroke. And yet here we are, and your career has reestablished. It's been one heck of a journey for you, Jennie.
Yeah, it really has. I feel we're 2 years on now, and I still feel emotional, and I find it a very emotive subject when we talk about strokes and your poor sister and what your family have had to go through and endure to see her recover. And it's a team event, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like F1. You're the car in the middle of it, and your team is moving around you seamlessly, hoping that you'll reboot, recover, and go on to win the race. And I had a lot of help in rebooting. And I worked so hard, the hardest I've ever worked, 6 hours a day, relentlessly trying to learn how to be me again, how to talk, how to cook, how to be a mum, everything had reset. And funnily enough, I was talking with my husband, Jamie, last night, and it was probably worse for him because I was just the car in the centre, whereas he had to see everything, make decisions, be the one that was there to pick me up.
He was the frustrated team principal.
Yeah. He shouted and swore a bit less than Gunther, but
a bit less than Gunther. I'm pleased to hear it.
He works in F1 too. It's fine. Yeah. It's been a real struggle, but at least, and someone told me this near the beginning of my recovery, and they said, at least with a stroke, every day you're getting better. Whereas with most illnesses, most diseases, once you've had your diagnosis, every day you're in decline.
Yeah.
And that one piece of information buoyed me to say, you know what, I've got another chance and I'm damn well going to use it. And try and live my best life whilst informing people about the dangers of stroke and making more people aware. Because if I can just affect one person positively in their stroke journeys, then that's okay. That's enough.
Well, it's incredible because listening to you on the podcast, and indeed I've listened to interviews that you've given, I think with Gabby Logan and other people recently, just amazing interviews. And if you didn't know that you had a stroke, it's incredible to see how brilliantly you are back to communicating at your very, very best. And it's an extraordinary example for other people. Let's just finish on the fact that in 2 weeks' time, you will be out here in Australia for the Melbourne Grand Prix, first Grand Prix of the 2025 season. How excited are you about that? When do you arrive? What are your plans? I mean, I happen to know from, I had a chat with Harry Benjamin. BBC are here in strength for this opening race. It's going to be momentous, isn't it?
Yes. Well, I have to say the BBC are there. I unfortunately am not coming out.
Okay.
I know, change of plans. Well, not really change of plans. Well, not really change of plans, just different plans. So I have other things that I need to concentrate on back here, unfortunately. So I'm going to save myself for Miami, which is also going to be awesome, hopefully. But so the BBC will be there in force, and I can't wait. It's going to be so exciting to see how things are going to unfold. Because as we started this podcast, we are in a state where we do not know who's going to win. Lando Norris, fastest on first day of testing. Lewis Hamilton leading the way in his Ferrari on second day of testing. Who could be fastest when it comes to Melbourne? I don't know. Could Fernando Alonso win? Could he pull something out the bag? That's what I mean. We are in a state where anything can happen. And I love that. First day of season is always exciting, but this season, it's the most excited we've been for decades.
Now, there's a lot of people are saying this is McLaren's year. I mean, they won the Constructors' Championship last year. You mentioned earlier on about all the driver changes. Only two teams haven't had a driver change. One is Aston Martin, but the other is McLaren. So the car and the team which has all the momentum behind it. And it brings me to the subject of the local hero, Oscar Piastri. Do you think Nicole Piastri's son can finally do that thing that no Australian driver has done and win? Can you imagine his home Grand Prix in Melbourne? That would be one heck of a way for him to start the season, wouldn't it?
Wouldn't it just be? I mean, I couldn't imagine anything more celebratory than Nicole under the podium, kind of probably doing like a message to Oscar when he's picking up his trophy, maybe doing a selfie at the same time. I mean, she would be maybe she wouldn't. Maybe she'd be disappointed, but he didn't go quite fast enough. No, Nicole. But you know what I mean? I mean, all said in jest, but it would be something incredible. And I don't cross my fingers for too many things to happen, because the natural order should unfold. But wouldn't that be something? And I think he deserves it, and I think he could do it. Honestly, I think there'll be a few Australians with a little betting slip in their pocket going, come on.
I don't want to go into too much detail on the Formula One 2025 because we generally don't go down too many rabbit holes on this podcast. But one thing I want to ask you about is, because I'm in Australia and this is the first Grand Prix of the season in Melbourne, and Oscar Piastri is a big topic. To what extent do you think Oscar's whole approach to Formula One is being molded and influenced by his management from Mark Webber, a guy who experienced what it was like to be, let's face it, number 2 driver at Red Bull, and that didn't go down well with Mark? He must be shaping the approach that Oscar is taking. And it's not too much of a stretch to imagine that Oscar's going to come out really fighting hard against Lando in that team.
Well, he has to. He absolutely has to. And Mark is the perfect person to be his wingman, to say, come on, you've got this. You're not a number 2. Because let's face it, a lot of people are already starting to write off Oscar's chances, because this is Lando's championship. This is Lando's year. He could be the world champion. Well, come on. If Lando can do it, then Oscar can do it too. And Mark needs to reinforce that message every morning, every day, every second, to say, Oscar, if you want this, you go out and blimmin' well take it. And that's what he has to do.
I love it, Jenny. It's just brilliant talking to you. I mean, the passion you have for the sport of Formula One comes through in everything you have to say about it. I'm sorry not to be seeing you in Melbourne. I hope to catch up with you. Maybe I'll see you in Miami. That would be even better. And thank you so much for joining us today on the Business of Winning podcast.
You're more than welcome. Thank you for having me. And just on one footnote, I have to say, I was in Abu Dhabi and I caught up with Oscar Piastri as the gold ticker tape was falling down around us in the pit lane after they'd won the team's championship. And I said to him, how do you feel? Great season. And he just looked at me and said, next season will be better. I'll be world champion.
Oh, I love it.
There we go. Mic drop.
Ladies and gentlemen, on that bombshell, Jennie Gow, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wasn't it just great to hear from Jennie Gow, one of the key voices of Formula One over the past decade and a half, bringing you her enthusiasm and her expertise from the pit lanes of the world to BBC 5 Live's audiences, including through its famous Checker Flag podcast, which she co-presents with regulars, including commentator Harry Benjamin and the BBC F1 correspondent Andrew Benson, who is himself one of the most authoritative voices on Formula One today. I must say, I thought the story behind Jennie's book, How to Read F1, was great to hear, not only because the book is a terrific read for any F1 fan, young or old, but she also used the writing of that to help her through that grueling period of recovery after suffering such a serious stroke. So it's great to hear and indeed see her broadcasting career powering ahead. I loved her thoughts on the season ahead, and particularly that awesome little sign-off about Oscar Piastri. Do like and subscribe to our podcast if you can. Feel free to message us through our website at performanceinsights.co.uk, or through our social media feeds, which can be found on LinkedIn and Instagram. And of course, you can also message me directly too via both of those platforms. We will be back with you in around 10 days' time with a season preview brought to you in the company of someone very notable who I'm sure you're going to enjoy. That's going to include a look back at the outcome of pre-season testing and a look forward to Melbourne and the commencement of the 2025 Formula One season. Looking forward to that and to talking all things Formula One, the business of winning.
Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe to the Business of Winning podcast. And if you want to learn more about Performance Insights, simply visit our website at performanceinsights.co.uk. providing expert speakers and hosts from the world of Formula One motor racing to corporate events and conferences worldwide.